So I've always been a fan of modeling World War II German armor and thought to myself, I haven't built a Sturmgeschutz IV before, so I dusted off a reference book and began to do some research on the subject. One vehicle in particular caught my attention. I took notice of the unusual solid disc type camouflage pattern on the Schurzen and thought that would be a challenging subject to model and replicate due to its complex camouflage pattern. My book contained 3 photos of this vehicle, and from them I could tell it was a later model Stug IV, as it had a remotely controlled machine gun mounted on the superstructure roof and flame suppressor type exhaust. It is also possible to deduce from these observations that this most likely would be a 3 return roller style chassis. I went to eBay, as I usually do for most of my model kits, to see what was available at that time. I found there were many different models and variants from various kit manufacturers. I first looked at Tamiya's Stug IV kit, but it has the typical round style exhaust muffler and folding style roof mounted machine gun shield, which makes it an early version, so that kit would not work for me. Next, I looked at what Dragon had to offer. They make 3 main Stug IV kits, an early, mid, and late version. I knew the early version was out of the question, so I focused on the mid and late kits. I noticed that the mid-production kit had the Schurzen and roof-mounted remotely controlled machine gun that I needed for my particular vehicle, but seemed to be missing the flame-suppressing type exhaust system. I looked a little closer at Dragon's late model kit and saw from pictures on the box that it did indeed have the late style exhaust and proper roof-mounted machine gun that I was looking for, but also seemed to be lacking the side skirts, which was going to be the main focus of my model. Despite this concern, I found a late version on eBay for an excellent price and hit the Buy It Now button. I had just bought my first Sturmgeschutz IV. The seller sent out the package swiftly, and before I knew it was on my kitchen table. I anxiously opened the kit to discover that, in fact, no Schurzen were included with this kit. Disappointed, I began trying to figure out my options. Once again, I turned to eBay for aftermarket Schurzen kits and found there were plenty of photo-etch options to choose from with a varying degree of prices. I am not a huge fan of photo-etch parts, and aside from PE grill sets, I may never use it. Cost was also a concern, as I had just bought my kit for $15 and the cheapest photo-etch skirts I could find was $13, which, if this is your only option, isn't really that bad, although practically doubling the cost of my completed project didn't really sit well with me. I recently bought a silhouette portrait die cutting machine, which is mainly used in scrapbooking, but thought it would come in very useful in model building. I've since used this machine to cut wheel masks for masking off the rubber portions of road wheels prior to base coating. I thought the silhouette handles masking tape like a champ, and I wondered how it would handle thin gauge sheet styrene. This again set my project in motion, so I bought some thin gauge styrene from the hobby store and quickly hit another roadblock. Just what exactly are the dimensions of Stug IV Schurzen? I grabbed my micrometer and reference book and went to work measuring the Schurzen in a line drawing diagram. I needed to check my measurements from the book to that of my model kit to verify the scale, so I compared the center to center of the Schurzen hanger teeth. From those measurement comparisons, I was able to determine that indeed the reference line diagram was in 1/35 scale, so any measurements I took from the book would be accurate. From there, I entered those measurements into the Silhouette Design program, and that's where we'll pick up the next segment of this video. Okay, let's get down to business. This first screen represents our 5 pieces of Schurzen and how they're going to look. This next screen is our actual cutting template screen. I've got 2 fronts and 2 back pieces, but I also had room to squeeze in 1 extra each of front and back. That way, if we have a problem when we're trimming and snapping the pieces, we'll have extras. And of course, here's our 6 sections representing the 3 center sections on each side of the vehicle. And this screen here is our test cutting screen. And even though there's a grid system set up here, it really doesn't line up exactly perfect with the cutting mat. So I always like to do a test cut, so then I know where the top of the cuts are going to start. And that's what I've got here. I've got some green tape on the cutting mat, and we're going to do a test cut here. Okay, let's have a look at that. Okay, and you kind of get a rough idea of what that's going to look like. And so here's the top of our cut line, so I know where to line up the plastic styrene. So let's get to it. Okay, I believe we are ready to start the cutting process. I did readjust the depth of the blade, made it deeper because we're cutting thicker material. Here is our cutting mat. There's our green mask that we just cut out. The sheet styrene is well above the cut line there, so we should be good to go there. All we need to do is flip this around and get her lined up. Let the machine start feeding, and we'll hit the start button and let her rip. Alrighty, let's see how we did. Probably pretty hard to see the scoring on all of our Schurzen here, but it looks like it did a fine job. So we're ready to start cutting these out and seeing our end result. Now when you're cutting these out, you're going to want to try to leave as much space from the cut of the machine to your scissor cut. That way that'll give you enough leverage to snap that plastic. So try to keep that in mind when you're trimming these out. Okay, I've got all my Schurzen pieces roughly cut out. These are the front sections, the middle sections, and the back sections. And all I'm going to simply do now is take the scissors and we're going to cut almost up to the scribed line from the top and bottom. Just like that. And then we're simply just going to snap these edges off. And there is one front section. So let's take a look and we'll cut a few more and we'll see what our end results look like. Okay, I've got one side all trimmed out, so let's do a test fit against our line drawing. Well, what do you think? Does it pass the test? So in conclusion to this tutorial, there's a few things I wanted to go over as far as finishing up these Schurzen so they're ready to hang. You'll want to get some thin steel wire like this. This is available at your hobby store. It was probably only 25 or 30 cents and it's 3 feet long. You'll want to take some needle nose pliers and bend some U-shaped pieces. Basically like if you were replicating a grab handle on a turret hatch or something like that. And then pre-drill a couple of holes so that you're able to recess your brackets down into the plastic a little bit and adhere them. You'd basically have to do the same thing with photo etch. You have to cut out all the little pieces, bend them up, and adhere them to the panels. This sheet of styrene was only $2.05. I did the calculations, and you can actually get 3 complete sets of Schurzen out of one piece, which breaks down to about 68 cents per vehicle. And of course, you know, you're not limited to just Sturmgeschutz. You can make any of the German tank and assault gun Schurzen. This here is an extra piece, and as you can see, it's thin enough to where you can bend it and warp it to make it look damaged. So that is really cool, easy to do. A lot of times kits will come with just too thick of side skirts and it doesn't look realistic, so you could easily take those measurements, replicate them again with some thinner stock, and bend them up a little bit so they look a little more realistic. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It was a lot of fun to make, and I hope it gives everyone an idea of what you can do with a silhouette portrait maker. Not only can you cut out wheel masks, but you can do cool projects like this too. So thanks for watching, and happy modeling.